Good afternoon and welcome to Governance, Administration and Finance Committee meeting 855. All committee members are present today. Councillor Deputy Chair, Councillor Martin, Councillor Fowler, Councillor Curtis, Councillor Wilkinson, Councillor Taylor and Councillor O'Neill. And we also welcome Councillor Gates and Acting Mayor Councillor Hamill. We have a request, given that 7.1 requires the time of our EGMs who are in the office, that we move that one to the front. But first I'll go through no apologies, leaves of absence, confirmation of minutes. Is there someone ready, willing? Councillor Fowler, move. Second, Councillor Martin. All in favour? Thank you. No conflicts of interest declarations. Okay, and we'll go through, are there any items anyone wishes to unstar? Councillor Fowler?
Thank you, Chair, and through you. I actually just had a question quickly on 6.2 and 6.3.
Okay, so we'll open 6.2, 6.3.
And then that's it. Thank you.
Okay, any others to be opened? Okay, do I need to take a procedural motion on moving 7.1 up? Yeah, okay. So I'll make a procedural motion that we will, actually, first of all, I'll accept and move all the starred items, which are 6.4, 7.2, 5.1. Thank you. Councillor Taylor to move. Seconder, Councillor Wilkinson. All in favour? Thank you. That is carried. So procedural motion that we take item 7.1 first. So all in favour? All in favour? Done. Thank you. So if we could start with the presentation for 7.1. Thank you. Is there a presentation?
No, there's no presentation.
Okay. So just questions. Councillor Wilkinson.
Just in noting that it was in closed sessions, would any questions have to go? Would we have to go into closed for that?
Most likely, yes. So before I do, does anyone have questions on this? Yeah, okay. So moving into closed, I move that. Second, Councillor Wilkinson. All in favour? And the reasons on the screen, section 254J, the reason that the matter involves the local government's budget. Thank you. So we're moving in. All in favour? Very good. Okay, so if we can have the recommendation for 7.1 on the screen. I got a mover for that item, Councillor Fowler, seconder Councillor Wilkinson. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Fowler? No? Okay. We take a vote. All in favour? Thank you. Okay, so that's 7.1. So we'll now move back up to 6.1, annual review of CEO delegations. Do we have any questions?
Sorry, don't have a question as such, but the way this is presented, I've got no idea what we've given delegations for, to be perfectly honest, because there's a very long list of what we have, what we can't delegate, and there's an even longer list of delegations that we've given, but because there's no description, I've got no idea what that delegation actually means. So I'm not on this committee,
No.
and I don't have a vote, but I mean, I quite frankly just don't see the point of having this presented because I don't know what's involved in each of those delegations.
Yeah, when I went through it again, I felt that I had a similar concern. So if we can just pick one out, for example. So page 30, local law cemeteries. So what does that mean if we're delegating that responsibility? Does that mean nothing about cemeteries will come to council without the kind of choice or discretion of the CEO?
Certainly, through the chair. So with local laws, for example, there's a range of powers within those local laws that can be delegated, and they could be to issue permits, to issue fines, those sorts of things within our local laws. And basically what this is saying is because council's role is to delegate to the CEO, and it's then the CEO's job to delegate down to staff, which are the officers on the ground that actually do that work, this is basically saying it's delegating all of the possible delegable powers, which is not every single line in those local laws. Some of them are not powers that can be delegated, down to the CEO, so in its entirety. So if the cemetery's local law, it's saying everything that can be delegated within that particular local law is delegated to the CEO.
Okay, and perhaps to take a different example, so the Human Rights Act, when that's delegated, is that about the implementation of that? Is that, and this one I suppose is of particular interest given the state government have just recently publicly stated that they are reviewing the interpretation of that legislation. I would have thought if there is interpretation to be done, that would be something worth happening at council. So can you just, what are we actually delegating when we state that?
Through the chair. So there would be powers within that Act, for example, that relate to whether we get a complaint that we haven't actually adhered to human rights, one of the principles of human rights. And there would be requirements in the Act that require us, for example, to review that decision that was made. And this would be delegating some of those powers attached to that process to review that decision. That's just one example. Okay. There's obviously 4,500 or a bit more than 4,500 powers across the 160 plus acts and local laws as a local government that we have the ability to exercise. And we are more than happy, probably not necessarily through a GAF committee meeting as such, because we would be here all day, but we're more than happy to look at ways in which we can actually and share with you either just electronically or do some training sessions about each of those pieces of legislation, what they mean, what those powers mean. We would actually love the opportunity and welcome that to be able to go through those with you.
Okay. Well, that might be not a bad idea. There's a couple there that I think it's just worth us having attention to. But I don't know whether that means that we need to alter anything in this recommendation. We can just request that separately. Are there any other questions about this recommendation? Councillor Martin?
Regard policy part of this.
Pardon?
No. Okay, apologies. No.
All right.
I'll save that. Thank you.
Okay. We all good? Have I got a mover for this one? Councillor Curtis, seconded Councillor Wilkinson. All in favour? Great. Thank you. So 2, 3 and 4. Oh, no, 6.2. Questions, Councillor Fowler, regarding the financial reports.
Thank you, Chair. I only have a quick question, and it was just in regards to Invest Gold Coast for 24-25. So my question was just what is the total budget allocated to Invest Gold Coast for 24-25, noting that we have the interim funding instalment of $5 million paid to commence operations on 10th of February, and what was the amount of the final payment to be made? I also make a quick note while we're here that the March financial report, it actually says that we started Invest Gold Coast on the 10th of March. So I'm not sure if it's meant to be the 10th of February or the 10th of March, but there's just two different dates in those two reports.
Through you, Chair, if you don't mind, through your indulgence, just one of my team members to see if they can answer that question directly for you on that contribution for Invest Gold Coast.
So through the Chair, as you said, we've made the interim payment to them of the $5 million. We're still undertaking a true-up of the cost because a lot of the contracts aren't fully novated over to the new entity yet. Hoping to complete that, I guess, by the end of May, but it's looking around the $7 million mark. 7 million?
7 plus 5. Is that right?
No, 7 in total.
Okay.
So 5 already, and there should be possibly another 2 to come.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, through you, Chair, and I've just asked the question on Feb and March for you.
Can I just ask a follow-on just on that item just there? So are we saying that for the whole of 24-25, the budget for Invest Gold Coast is $7 million after the true-up? It needs to be refined, but estimated at? Prorated from the 10th of Feb.
Prorated from the 10th of February.
So it's the 10th of Feb, not the 10th of March?
Yeah, operation.
It's prorated since they've stood up, but we will check whether it's from Feb or from March for you. Yeah.
That answers that question. Thank you, Chair.
Was that it in that item?
Yes. No, I can wait till 6.3.
6.3, okay. Would you like
Chair, it is February.
It's fair. Would you care to move that, Councillor Fowler? The 6.2 item. Would you like to move the item? Seconder? Councillor Wilkinson, all in favour? Great, thank you. 6.3. Question, Councillor Fowler.
Thank you. We had a very informative workshop a few months ago, and I guess I was just keen to, if we can, in open, or if we need to go to close, but just get an update on our current cash position and our debt position. I'm really interested in the cash position, and of that cash position, how much is restrained, and if we also have the figures on council resolution restrained beyond that, that would be really helpful.
Should we go into closed? I think it's a good idea. So we'll go into closed because it's related to the local government budget. Move that. Second, Councillor Wilkinson, all in favour? Great, thank you. Streaming on. Great. Okay, so we have now considered questions for 6.3. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Curtis. Seconder, Councillor Wilkinson. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Curtis? No. All in favour? Great, thank you. 6.4 was starred, so we'll go to 6.5, policy reviews. 67. Is there a presentation? Great, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. There's quite a few policies on this review report this afternoon, and as part of the reviews that we've undertaken, there are two policies that are recommended to be retired. That is the Asset Management Policy and the Public Access to Council and Standing Committee Agenda Minute Report Documentation Policy. There are a range of policies that we have reviewed and revised, with the occasional policy undergoing a slight name change to better reflect the purpose of the policy. And they are listed in recommendations 2A through F. And I'll just go through each of those briefly for you and the reasonings as to why the recommendations are proposed in that way. In relation to the asset management policy, which is on the next, was originally adopted in 2010. There have been no substantial reviews of that policy since that time. It was first adopted in relation to the changes in legislation back in 2009 and the new principles that were put in place under Section 4 of the Local Government Act, and the requirements of one of those principles being that local governments must always keep under consideration sustainable development and management of assets and infrastructure, and it's essentially a way that we do business. As part of the work that's being undertaken at the moment in relation to our asset management framework or asset excellence project that is being reported through Transport and Infrastructure, one of the objectives of that will be to develop a strategic asset management plan, and that is a key consideration of the Australian standards for asset management, and it's a consistent document that's put in place across most local governments right across Australia. It's a document that we don't currently have. The current content of the policy as it stands today is what you would traditionally find in a strategic asset management plan. And on the basis of that's the work that's being undertaken in Transport and Infrastructure at the moment, it's recommended that the asset management policy is really not adding additional value to the decision-making process at the moment, and that it's recommended for retirement on that basis.
Is there any questions about that policy before we move on? No, straightforward. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. The next policy that's recommended for retirement is the Public Access to Council and Standing Committee Agenda Minute Report Documentation Policy. And this policy, again, was put in place back in 2010 with very little review, strategic reviews of that policy happening since that time. When we've undertaken a review of this particular policy line by line, almost 100% of the policy content is in the legislation. So it is very much a duplicate of what currently exists either in the Local Government Act or the local government regulations themselves. We do understand that there's a position that Council wants to retain in relation to circulating agendas 5 days in advance of the meeting. The Local Government Act requires a minimum of 2 days to be circulated to councillors. The 5-day requirement as it stands at the moment currently exists in a mayoral directive, and that mayoral directive has been in place. Don't have the date right in front of me at the moment, I didn't put it in here, but for quite a number of years, and it's been reviewed 2 or 3 times over that period. The mayoral directive is from the Mayor's office, so it's almost it's the same.
Sorry, what was that? Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. So it pretty much is the same as a council decision. It withstands a change in council, as it does withstanding a change in the individual that's in the offices of a mayor over various terms of council. So that mayoral directive still exists, and it will continue to exist until such time as it's rescinded or retired. And it's on that basis, because this particular policy doesn't incorporate that 5 days. It's through the mayoral directive. We're recommending that this policy actually be retired.
Yes.
Sorry, I just have a question about the Act, because one of the dot points on page 70 says, identifies that the requirement to make the agenda publicly available by 5 p.m. on the next business day after the notice of meeting is given to councillors. Well, the notice, what is exactly is the notice of meeting? I mean, we all have the meeting schedule. We all know when the meetings are going to occur. Does that mean after the agenda is distributed?
Correct. So the notice of meeting is generally the first page of the agenda that formally gives notice of the actual meeting. And it's in these days, a long time ago, they used to be quite separate documents, but these days they're all incorporated into the actual agenda as one document. So the minute that you get the agenda under the Local Government Act, it has to be published on the council's website within 24 hours or by 5 p.m. the next day.
Except that the next dot point says, as soon as practicable, that the agenda is made publicly available as soon as practicable after it's made available to councillors. So I don't understand the conflict between those two dot points. The requirement to make related reports publicly available at the time the agenda is made public.
Requirements.
So is that other reports related to the agenda and not specifically the agenda itself?
So that specific one refers to, for example, if a late report is provided. So, for example, if a late report is provided, that it be made as soon as practicable after it's made available to councillors as it is to the public. So under normal circumstances, your formal agenda is a minimum of 2 days under the Local Government Act. If there's a late report, for example, that was circulated the day before, then there would be an expectation that as soon as practical, that is also published on the website for the community's view.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And just for clarity, if this is retired, the mayoral directive from 2019 stands, because that was introduced, and I'm very perplexed about the advice here that says there was one in 2014 and 2018, because I was not of that understanding, but perhaps there was. But it was introduced in 2019 after we'd had a series of very large reports coming to councillors, and to diligently do the job, it was simply not possible to read the volume of agendas in 2 days. And councillors would agree that this round is the same. And I mean, I was visiting my mum who had a fall last week, and so I've had to do not just this round in the last couple of days, but also we've got our budget papers at the moment. So I would be mortified if that 5-day time frame disappeared, because it was the opinion of all councillors who have to read those things that we don't get weeks of preparation time like the officers do in putting it all together. We just get a number of days to absorb it and ask the relevant questions. So the assurance that remains is comforting.
On that, I recognise that the Local Government Act has to consider many different types of councils. So they have very small councils that might actually have a few hundred people in them. And for them, 2 business days may make sense, given what we're having to attempt to digest. I do think 5 business days. So my understanding is you do have... we could defer this particular policy if I propose that we do keep a policy to make sure that there's 5 business days. So I think, for me, I think it makes sense that it's in a policy. But that's what this committee is here to decide. Are we comfortable? Is it sufficient enough for it to be in a mayoral directive? I mean, if we had a change of mayor, we had a different circumstance, my preference would be in a policy, and then it would come through for a council decision on a policy. Did you have a question, Councillor Fowler?
And just bear with me, but I remember there being a discussion around this when we first came on, probably 2 months after we were appointed, and the conversation was around 2 days. And I remember Councillor Gates saying, well, no, it's 5. Now I understand why that was happening, but I can't remember if it was in the Act or in one of our conducts where it said 2, and I was just thinking, do we need to look at that as well, or is there a legislative requirement, and which supersedes which? That's probably my question. Because if the policy supersedes it all, then I think we should keep the policy.
And it does, right?
The legislation is the head of power at the end of the day, so it will always override council policy. So the minimum standard under legislation is 2 days. There has been a position of this council which has been reflected through a mayoral directive in the past, that we have a minimum standard over and above the legislation, which is those 5 days. As to whether you keep that as a mayoral directive or a policy is at your discretion.
Yep. And I suppose, so, yeah, the Act trumps. So if we wanted to change it to 1 business day, we couldn't, because that's their minimum, that we have to uphold that, but we can do it more than that. Councillor Curtis, you had a question?
So perhaps just seeking clarity. So currently, the current policy doesn't prescribe the 5 days. The mayoral directive does.
No, through the chair, sorry. The current policy does not incorporate the 5 days. It only exists in the mayoral directive. Sorry.
And then the follow-up question, clarity again, that it didn't matter whether we had a change in mayor, that directive stays until such time as it's rescinded or... So it would... Yeah, okay.
Through the chair, correct. Correct. Rescinded or revoked through the mayor's office, correct.
So it seems like I'm comfortable with it being retained as a mayoral directive.
Okay, great. Another question on this one?
Thanks, Chair. So in the policy, like, it has some fair bit, and I take the point it's in the legislation, but there's a lot around procedure and minutes list and unconfirmed minutes and all of those type of operational things. They're not picked up in the Act, though, are they? Like, I suppose there's, by outside the timing of the 5 days, is there information in here that we provide clarity to the community about what and councillors with expectations?
Through the chair. So we've taken the same approach with this policy as we've taken with all policies, which is to remove procedural matters, given that that's the role and responsibility through the CEO to implement procedure. So those matters, whilst any of the departments internally may decide to keep procedures, it's not something that we would bring back through a policy position to council to have them endorsed, but we can communicate and convey those to you, what those procedures, and to the community through other mechanisms such as through websites and or other types of advertisement to let them know how we actually do things day to day.
Right, so from our, if this policy were retired and these procedures would they be listed publicly even for councillors? Where would we expect to see, just to have that procedure for reference?
I couldn't answer that without consulting with the relevant department. I'm not sure. Jodie, do you want to answer that off the floor, or do you want me to take that on notice? Beautiful, thank you.
No questions about that one. We'll move on to the next policy. Thank you.
What's the outcome of the committee on that one? Is it that we retire it or we don't retire it?
Well, we're just still going through the presentation. I'm just taking questions at the presentation.
Oh, okay.
I will have I've got a change recommendation, which includes deferring this one till the next meeting. It means that we can get that information on notice, and we could also get a policy example if we were going to do a policy, so it's crystal clear, also really transparent to the public. This is the policy on when you can access information. That's my preference. So yeah, so I'll be suggesting we defer it, but I think if we just get through our questions and then we can work on a recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. The next policy that's presented for, that has, not presented for retirement, but it has been reviewed. This is a relatively new policy position for Council, having been first adopted back in 2023, so only a couple of years, and it was put in place originally to formalise our position in assisting customers who were impacted by water and sewerage inundation in their private properties. It is a requirement under the South East Queensland Water and Wastewater Customer Code that we have a policy in relation to this matter. It was previously called Assisting Impacted Customers, which didn't give a lot of guidance to those people out in the community if they were looking for a particular policy on this matter. So we've, in consultation, we've looked to actually rename this to reflect better the purpose of what the policy is actually about. And it's really minor updates in this particular policy that's been reviewed. There's no substantive change or change to the intent of this particular policy.
Any questions? No, that sounds like a good thing to do. Next one.
Thank you. The next one is the complaint about the public official policy. This is one of our few policies that we're required to have under legislation, and we're required to have this policy under the Crime and Corruption Act. Section 48A is the relevant section. The Crime and Corruption Commission themselves put out a document which is called a template policy, and their preference is that organisations pretty well follow that template policy word for word. There's also a requirement from the Crime and Corruption Commission that we actually consult with them on our draft policy. We have done that, and we have received support back from one of their senior lawyers that they're comfortable with the policy that's presented to you today. So we are required to have a policy. It does follow the template provided by the Commission, and it's supported.
Okay, next one, if we've got no questions.
The next one that we've reviewed, it's not a legislatively required policy, and it's not all councils particularly have this policy. Some do, some don't, but it's the CEO annual performance appraisal policy. It was called Performance Review, but again, we've just slightly amended the wording to align with the Local Government Act and exactly how it's shown in the legislation. So under, obviously, Section 194 requires Council to make the appointment of the CEO. Section 12 requires, as part of the Mayor's responsibilities, he has additional responsibilities, which includes conducting the performance appraisal of the CEO at least annually in a way that is decided by Council. And the way that it's decided by Council traditionally here at City of Gold Coast has been to keep it in this particular policy. That's the meeting the way that it's decided by Council. We've reviewed this policy. We've undertaken quite a bit of benchmarking with other councils, primarily around Queensland, to see how it stacks up, and on the basis that it is a consistent policy with other councils, we have only proposed some slight amendments to this policy before you today.
Councillor Gates.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. So the slight amendments is a pretty big change, I think, which formerly the CEO's KPIs were to be presented to the Council.
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone's aware that we have no role to play in the appointment of our EGMs, but we certainly have a role to play in the appointment of the CEO. So from my perspective, it's very important that we know whether the CEO has met his KPIs or what the assessment has been in relation to those KPIs, because we all work with the CEO. So I would want, am I correct in that you're proposing that Council has no role to play and that only the Mayor marks the KPIs and the Council never gets to know? Because there's it suggests keeping it confidential. So does that mean confidential from Council?
Through the chair, no. The clause in there around confidentiality is just a reminder that the documentation themselves is confidential to council, which is obviously all of yourselves.
So would the KPIs still be presented to council before adoption?
So the way that it's been proposed and suggested is that that has been done, or it's traditionally been done a little bit outside of the council meeting, and that was what the policy changes were reflected. We're happy to revert back if the preference is still to bring it back through an actual council committee.
This one is another one that I have a changed recommendation on. I think the policy that's been put in place is good practice, and again, there's a difference between us and a lot of other councils because of our, for various reasons. So I have requested, and I believe that Ms Green's got an amended policy for us to consider, which is effectively the policy as it stands now, just providing flexibility on dates, which wasn't in there, and, you know, making the correct updated name of the committee and things like that.
And the revised draft that we can bring up on screen for you does actually include that the KPOs and the annual performance comes back through the Governance, Administration and Finance Committee.
Okay,
so we're suggesting that is put back into the policy for you.
Thank you.
Should we have a look at that on screen now? Would that be useful?
Yeah.
I didn't read it.
So the particular clause that we would propose to update in the final version, if endorsed by council, is that the Mayor will provide a written report to the Governance, Administration and Finance Committee on the outcomes of the annual performance appraisal and the forthcoming year's KPOs.
In that clause, we had discussed at our briefing that we would put a time frame on that. Should we say, do we need to do that? Like at the next committee meeting or within 4 weeks? Or
After, we can absolutely include that. Sorry, that was my mistake.
So if we did that, the Mayor will provide, and what would be your suggestion? Within 4 weeks or within 6 weeks? Or
my suggestion, just given that meetings schedules do fluctuate from year to year, is that we put in there at the next available committee.
Okay. So at the end of that highlighted statement, because this is the amended policy recommendation, that we would just add at the next available committee meeting. The other thing that's changed, I'll just note, so people can ask their questions. The main thing that's changed in this document from the old to this new revised is just taking out specific dates. So taking out, it's got in there 31st of August. So depending on when you start your contract, that may not be a very helpful date. So instead, we're just putting in, as you can see in Clause 2, that it's annually. It just provides a bit more flexibility. So questions? Councillor Wilkinson?
Thank you, Chair. I think just one other change that I would note from the previous policy is that there's this line in number 3 that basically said the Mayor and the CEO shall initially agree upon the KPIs for the following year, and the Council will determine the forthcoming year's KPIs at the full Council meeting. My understanding of reading that new policy is that the Council really doesn't have a role in it now, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you've picked up a good one, and that I meant for that to be in there as well. So with point 3, and so this is for committee to consider, that we would revert back to the existing policy wording, which is that the Mayor and the CEO, so 3 KPOs for the following year, comma, and the Council will determine the forthcoming year's KPOs at a full meeting of Council. Do we need to put a date on that again?
Through the Chair, we had tried to incorporate that with Clause 4, whereby we actually had stated that the Mayor will provide a written report.
And forthcoming year's
KPOs, which does give Council the opportunity to have a say in those KPOs.
Well, as long as that's clear, because even in your point 4, I don't take comfort in saying that we do have a determination point by the Council there. The way I read that is in number
Yep.
3, the mayor and the CEO shall decide it. Then we're going to get an update on the performance, and then we're going to be told that these are the new KPOs. That doesn't then show me flexibility for the council to contribute. If I, again, that's just food for thought for my fellow committee members, but that's the way that I interpret that particular wording.
I agree with that, because there's difference between council agreeing to and committee receiving a report on. So if I'm going to put up this change recommendation, I'd prefer that we do keep that. So the KPOs at a full meeting of council, and what do we do about the date on that part? And we take out the forthcoming years in 4? No, sorry, on 4. That one stays. Yep.
So I think if we look at it from the perspective, do you want this all to come through the GAF or straight to full council, would be the first question, and make that consistent in the process. And then is at what point then do you want to be able to make that decision in relation to the KPOs? Is it at the time that the performance appraisal report is coming to you and you agree on those KPOs? We could simply make a change in line 4 that says the outcomes of the annual performance appraisal and resolve the forthcoming year's KPOs, so that then that makes it very clear you're making that decision in relation to that matter.
Apologies. I think that words it better, just in that sense that it doesn't mean to say that what is then brought forward is absolute. I think that this still creates that opportunity for resolution to take place, where if there were to be, and again, we do have from time to time other suggestions that could be put in forward, that would be given consideration as part of that if piece, I guess. So I'm more confident with that particular wording versus what was there prior.
Yeah, so I'm happy to if everyone's comfortable, include that's the job is to resolve those forthcoming year.
Councillor Curtis.
Thank you, Chair. Just a throw to the more senior colleagues in the room. I was just wondering how Statement 3 has looked like as a process in the past, because I'm trying to conceptualise what it's going to look like.
We might go to the councillor who was here before 2020.
Are you aware of how that's happened?
So how is...
Sorry,
I think,
so the question is... the direction is that the council will determine the forthcoming year's KPOs at a full council meeting of council prior to 31st of August each year, but I don't have a recollection of that occurring in my tenure, and I was wondering if anybody recalls a time that it occurred and just what it looks like. Do we sit down and talk about KPO? Like, how is it analysed that we select those for the CEO?
As I understand it, the Mayor and the CEO will agree the KPOs, and they'll simply be presented to council before they're actually endorsed. But I think what's been happening, the policy has not been being adhered to over recent years. Perhaps for the last 3 or 4 years, the policy has not been adhered to. So clearly it's timely that it's reviewed to decide whether we need a policy or we don't need a policy.
So I think in process, it certainly makes sense for KPOs to be kind of worked out between 2 people, the CEO and the Mayor. The purpose of this policy is that when those KPOs are determined, then they still have a mechanism for coming through governance and council to say, just really, it's unlikely that I would imagine that the committee is going to have, no, we want these KPOs, but it means that there is engagement from council. There's ownership in us determining what those KPOs are. Just follow up, Councillor Curtis.
Thanks, Chair. So I totally get that that's the intent, but given that is what exists now but is not what is being practiced, I'm just, it's hard to fathom that if we go down a policy renewal that includes something that's not being enacted at the moment, there must be a reason why it's not occurring. Well, I'd love to know more about it.
I think it is an unfortunate oversight. So this is the thing with policies. If we aren't looking at them, we're not calling on it. So now that we are addressing it, we can say, no, look, you know what, that policy is valuable, but it's up to all of us to ensure that it is adhered to. Councillor O'Neill.
Thanks, Chair. And I think, Councillor Gates, I think there has been occasions where the list has been presented to us and we have made a couple of changes yet.
Councillor Wilkinson, did you have a question?
I did, Chair, but I think it's fine the way it is. It was only in relation to, I note that we're a written report would be going to GAF, but realistically, if it's going to GAF, it'll get to full committee anyway. It was more just my thinking process that is it really needed to go to GAF in the first instance, or would it just be relevant to just go straight to a full council meeting in that sense? But it doesn't bother me either way. I was just kind of thinking it in my head, and I was quite happy to leave it, but just food for thought if anyone else wanted to see that changed.
I think it is important that it comes to the governance committee. I think there's a greater rigour that occurs at committee meetings, that can occur at committee meetings, and depending what's on the agenda at council, things can kind of like possibly be, reviewed or jumped pretty quick. So I think that process that's in the policy makes sense. I would be wanting to see that maintained. Are you comfortable with that wording now that you've got on the screen? Does that make sense?
Through the
Paul?
Chair, if I could just...
Yeah, through your Chair, and just a devil's advocate position on this is, to Councillor Wilkinson's point, if consideration is given to council, then committee isn't a full council. So
Sorry, could you say that again, a bit louder?
A committee doesn't have a full council. So with consideration to everyone considering the KPOs from the prior year and a true governance perspective, we're doing the same for the forthcoming year for the KPOs. So it might make sense. And again, devil's advocate, it's your decision. But for a full complement of all councillors to be here to consider the prior year KPOs.
Well, I think that's open. I think that's the case with everything we discuss at every committee meeting, and it's certainly there's a recommendation that would come from this committee, and then it will, if required, be fully revisited at council. I think there's a reason why there is a committee process, personally, but we can play with that one. But on that, are you okay with that wording? Does that wording works as a policy? Yep. Councillor Gates.
I just want to contribute that I would heed the advice of Mr. Callender there and send. I mean, this is probably the biggest thing to be discussed for the city, and I think it's disrespectful to do it with a committee rather than sending it to full.
Okay, so if there is a majority view of that in the room, then I'll just change my recommendation to that. So who's of the people who are Councillor O'Neill, Councillor Fowler, what's your view on that?
I'm thinking of the councillors who are not present with us today, and I can hear them.
Full
and
council?
I think it should be full council.
Full council?
Yeah.
I just want to add to that, though. If there's an agenda item and someone's got interest in it, we still can have that conversation, have those conversations, and can really work through it. Doesn't mean it can't be pulled out at full council as well.
No.
So that's just my...
Yeah. The reason why I think it makes sense is because there is a different dynamic at committee meetings. We go into things in a greater kind of digesting rigour. That's my reason. So, Councillor Taylor, Councillor O'Neill, what's your view?
No, I think it should go to full council.
Okay.
I think, and I think that's always been the case.
No, it's not, according to the policy.
Well,
The previous policy, it went to events, tourism and governance if it went there.
2020.
Yeah. So given light that had been the former policy, as long as we're adhering to our policy, and I think taking on board what Councillor Taylor had said, which is kind of what I was alluding to earlier, where I had the thought initially, I would like to see it obviously get to full council. I think it could be pulled out, of course, at full council. but I'm like I said, I'm comfortable either way personally. If it comes through governance, even if they're not on the committee, obviously members can still attend or councillors can still attend and give their 2 cents during that time. But if it then needs to be pulled out at full council, the opportunity is still there.
And my understanding is the last time this policy was adhered to fully was 2020. Councillor Gates.
Just add that it will be the Mayor presenting the outcome of his discussions with the CEO. And so for me it makes no sense not to have the Mayor presenting that report to us at full council. Sorry.
No, that's fair.
So we're clear as mud on that one. Let's just move on and we'll come back to that. Are there any other points or queries about this policy? No? Okay, great. So should we move on to the next one?
Thank you. Okay. The next one, thank you. Okay, so the next one is the advertising spending policy. This again is one of our legislated policies that we have to have under Section 197 of the Local Government Act. This particular version of the policy was the original policy was put in place in 2011. There has been some amendment since that time, but nothing really substantive in relation, and it is a pretty consistent policy. The rules generally are pretty consistent across most local governments in relation to this policy. The purpose is for this policy to outline under the Local Government Act, our ability to spend public funds on advertising is for specific purposes, and it's to educate the public, to inform or educate the public when it's in the public interest. And it's designed, or advertising spending is not to be used for the purposes of publishing or distributing election material, including material aimed to influence an elector or affect the result of an election. That's pretty well taken straight from the Local Government Act itself. It's a straightforward policy. We've presented it as a reviewed policy for you and to bring it up to date.
Any questions on that one? No? Move on. Next one.
Beautiful. And I two more. The next one is the public art policy. So this one's probably one of the more substantive reviews that we've undertaken in the suite that we've got before you today. This policy was originally adopted back in 2002. There was a substantive review undertaken in 2007 and then again more so in 2021. In 2007, there was an external consultant brought in to help facilitate that review about the way in which we deliver, manage and set our policy position around public art. It's not legislatively required, but generally public art policies help us to put in place some rules around how we manage, maintain, fund and make sure that we, I suppose, apply a life cycle approach to public art, and that's the way in which we've approached the review of this particular policy. Again, as with other policies, we've removed all of the procedural elements of the policy. However, for Council's reference and to see that those particular ones are absolutely being maintained, we've provided them in the report today for information, as we have with the revised terms of reference for the Public Art Advisory Group, who help inform and provide recommendations around commissioning and decommissioning, etc., of public art.
Councillor Gates.
Thank you. When you say recommendations regarding commissioning or decommissioning, is there anywhere in this policy where recommendations come to council after they've been assessed by the PAAG?
Yeah. Through the Chair, the current process is the recommendations from the PAAG go through to the Executive General Manager of Services Gold Coast, and depending on the financial limits and the cost value, whether it aligns with our financial delegations or it exceeds our financial delegations, is when it does or doesn't come through to Council, unless you specifically want to change those rules.
Well, that would be my preference.
Yeah.
That their recommendations are presented to council prior to commissioning, but I'm not on this committee.
Well, I also agree with that. So we'll see what the view is and if we want to amend that one. Councillor Fowler?
I just had 2 points to this policy. One is there's nowhere in here where councillors are consulted, and I just wanted to know if there was any, way that we can look at when it is in our respective divisions, whether we're along for the journey rather than just a presentation of what the artwork is going to be. I don't know if that's city officers would recommend that approach, but just a consideration. And the other one is just regarding procurement. I don't really see any reference to this and any preference given to local artists, and I just didn't know if that was captured somewhere else, or because I feel like we should be, when we do procurement, focusing on various things, one of those being local artists as a consideration.
Yeah, the lights, dare I say.
Through the chair. So we do have, I'll address the latter one first if I can for you, Councillor Fowler. So we do have requirements in our procurement policy that does talk to our preference for local spend. So the two should actually work hand in hand in that regard. In relation to consultation, we can look to put some strengthening in this particular policy, but I'd also refer councillors to our delegations policy, which does talk to the need to consult with councillors on matters that are of public interest, in particular in their local divisions. And I would expect public art in any division is of public interest, so it should absolutely be something that you're consulted on, and that is also reflected in the commissioning and decommissioning guidelines, which are provided as attachment to the report as well. So there's a range of different, I suppose, threads requiring consultation with councillors through the guidelines attached to the policy, through the delegations policy itself, and anything that is of public interest, we should always be coming in having a conversation with you.
Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a quick question that might not be policy related, but is public art related. Is there a city stockpile of not displayed public art that can that as I punch through my question, despite the that is potential for being used in other areas, if so be it? I didn't think that was going to be a controversial question, Nobba.
I just, in June last year, I was in Doha and I saw exactly our silver ferns, but with lights attached to the ferns, and they went down both sides of the highway and they were magnificent. So yes, we've got silver ferns in storage. We could put them somewhere and they would look beautiful if we got lights attached to them.
Yeah, I've got a Santa that's got a missing leg. We could. Yeah. Answer's yes.
I believe so. I'm getting nods in the back, so I believe so. There's something. I don't know what it is.
Councillor Neal, do you have any questions or comments about this policy? Do you have any questions about this policy?
I did notice it does mention local artists in the policy already, and that is going to remain, I take it? Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And one more.
Right.
Thank you, through the chair, is the last one, which is really, I suppose, quite administrative in the changes that we've made in relation to this policy. And it was, I believe, a request of council through other conversations, was to bring you back an update of the enterprise risk management policy that actually captures in an ongoing policy position council's risk appetite. So we've very much reviewed that, taken away unnecessary statements that were in the previous policy and made sure it reflects the new risk management framework and risk appetite statements for the city.
And who's the person, is that you, who has to be responsible when we change the risk appetite, that the policy gets changed? The table gets updated?
We would need to bring it back to confirm it with council, but yes, through my
the policy needs to come back. It's not like updated, right? Okay.
100%. So now that it's in policy, we will always, any change will have to come back to council.
Right. So we can assume to see this one probably once a year, maybe.
Either once a year, or I would recommend at least once every 2 years with risk management.
Okay. Good. Any questions on that one? Giggling Gerties? No? Okay. So I have a change recommendation for this one. The change recommendation suggests that we don't retire the public access policy yet. That gets deferred. It comes back to next committee meeting. We can get the answers then on the questions that were taken on notice today, and my preference is that we implement a policy that articulates 5 business days. So we can consider that one then. And then CEO annual performance appraisal as amended. So the public access be brought back. Was there any change to the public art policy that needed to happen, Councillor Gates? Did you want to make an amendment to the art policy regarding what comes back to council?
I did want to ensure. Sorry, I did have a note there. But I didn't ask the question, and I was advised that it would come.
Yeah.
To council. Sorry.
Okay, if you're happy.
I did have in number 10. I did have and approved by council prior to commissioning, but I think you suggested that it would come to that they would come to council, but depending on the value.
Oops, excuse me. Through the chair, yes. So I believe over $2 million in alignment with the new financial thresholds that have been put in place for staff financial delegations. So up until $2 million is under the EGM service GC financial delegation threshold. Anything over would absolutely come through. Can I just
so I guess the question for councillors is the threshold too high? And do we...
But what is the consensus here? Committee members. It seems very high to me. Councillor Martin.
So my question, that threshold now is it will only come to council at 2 million and over. Is that?
That's the absolute recommended change based on the changes we made to our internal CEO to staff delegations about 15, 16 months ago to align with those financial thresholds. But again, it is absolutely council's will. If you want it to come back at a lower value, you're more than welcome to tell us that.
I think the reason for that is more it's to align with operational methods, but if we don't feel comfortable with not having oversight on that, then we should change it. Councillor O'Neill?
Just noting, it says in here that divisional councillors are informed at project initiation and artwork selection steps for all projects regardless of financial threshold. The delegated decision maker can have the matter referred to council at any step if significant risk is identified.
Who can have it referred to council?
The delegated decision maker can have the matter referred to council at any step.
Yeah. So,
but it does say that divisional councillors should be informed through all the steps.
Pardon? 1 million? Who's going? 1 million, 1 million? Councillor Curtis?
Is it the total cost of the art display or our contribution to it, that figure?
So the decision would be associated with the total cost. So we're enacting a decision in relation to a total value. So because we would generally, in most instances, still have to maintain that asset moving forward, even though we might not be contributing the full cost to its initial creation.
Okay. Could we change that to 1 million in the policy, Councillor Martin?
Question: what is the annual budget for public art? Like, what's our annual?
I would have to take that on notice unless there's anyone in the gallery that can give me the answer to that question straight up. No. I would have to take that on notice and come back to you.
Just following on, as far as additional bits of information potentially coming back to us, can you give us a figure perhaps for the last 5 years about how many pieces of public art have been commissioned through the city as well? Just to give us a bit of an idea of how many pieces are we talking about and what dollar figures were they at? That would possibly be of use.
Would it be cleaner if we put that into a GBI, that it comes back, or not necessary? Info? Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that on board.
Okay. Good. So pardon? I'm suggesting that we don't defer the public art, but we make the measure at 1 million instead of 2. But if people want to defer it, we can defer it. Councillor Wilkinson?
I don't necessarily want to defer it, Chair. I think dropping the threshold, though, is a little bit lower would be my preference. The challenge is I would love to see the figures first, perhaps, for how much we spend on it. That's all, and that's why I'm thinking if we can do it before full council. But
before full council?
Okay. Only if you think that that's possible. I don't want to put unnecessary pressure on if that's...
I'm getting a nod, so yes.
Okay. Well, why don't we put the 1 million on it? We'll get the information before full council, and then we can go from there. Okay. So we're going to make a change to the public art policy to the 1 million. Over that comes to council. And then in C, as amended, so with my change recommendation, I am going to maintain it as that it does come to council, come to committee. I think that everything that can come to committees should come to committees. I think we would make a special invitation for the mayor to come and present it. But I think, and I know it's kind of different because I'm in this seat, but there is something different about an independent person again and an independent body reflecting that, and effectively the mayor reporting. I think there's a reason why that policy was originally stated like that. So I'm going to put that change recommendation up, and if it's not something you're aligned with, then you can, choose elsewhere otherwise.
I personally think we're going in the right direction, Chair, and I think that you're doing the right thing in that respect. I just don't know in relation to, given that this has got to go to full council anyway, I think in light of what Councillor Gates said earlier, especially about the mayor having to present it, I think that it would just be, I think having all the councillors in the one room perhaps would make more sense for him to also deliver it as well. So I would kind of steer back towards full council.
That's all right. I'm going to put it up, and if it changes, we change it. No? Just go.
I think it will be an insult to the mayor. On past experience, I think the mayor is perfectly capable of...
Intent. That's not the intent.
I know it's not the intent, but I've had a recent conversation with him about something similar, and I think he felt quite insulted that there was doubt about his ability to negotiate the appropriate outcome. So I would be... I don't get a vote today, but I want you to...
Can I
be comfortable in knowing?
Just if I can just come to you in 1 second. So is there any committee members here who feels that they think it should come through committee in first step? Sounds like the consensus is we go to full council. Councillor Hamill?
I was only going to move the amendment to your motion to make it go to full council.
Okay, cool. Well, let's just do that. So let's just add, the mayor will provide a written report to the next available full council meeting on the outcomes of the annual appraisal and
to resolve.
And maybe if we just put and council will resolve the forthcoming year's KPOs. Is everybody okay with that wording? Councillor Curtis?
Thanks, Chair. I'm okay with the wording, but I wondered if you would be interested in considering some further rigour to the threshold of whatever set the figure that you set to it, given my concerns about whether it's the total cost or our contribution to it.
Are you talking about the art policy?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, we jumped policies. So with that one, I suggest what we do today is we just do the 1 million. We set the benchmark 1 million. It comes to council. We get the further information. If there's anything else that you think needs to be done in that, once we've got that further information, we can do a change recommendation on that piece. Unless there's something that you see now that needs or would be useful to put in right now.
While we're on the subject, I'll just highlight that obviously when we contribute to an art piece, it seems to be perceived by the public that it's ours, regardless of how much we contributed versus the state, for example. So I just think it's really important that it's captured as the total cost as opposed to our contribution to it, because the public see it as our art.
Okay, yeah, no, that's a fair point, and I think that's really up to every time that recommendation comes. That's not something that needs to be picked up in here. But the biggest issue, as has been pointed out, is it is up to us to fund the cost of maintaining that ongoingly if we do own it. Okay, rightio. Ms. Green, have we got all that covered in that amendment, do you think?
Would it be okay if I just run through them all one by one?
Thank you.
Is that okay? So asset management policy to be retired. The public access policy, we're taking, based on this amendment, removing that from the recommendation. The next 6 policies revised as presented today, except for the CEO performance appraisal policy with that amendment. And that we bring the public access 5-day policy back to the next round of GAF meetings at the end of May.
I think in E we also need to add, as amended, just to note the change to the $1 million limit.
The $1 million. I believe the financial threshold's actually in the guidelines, which is attached to the policy. So I'm happy to take that on notice and action that without amending the policy itself.
Thank you.
If you're comfortable.
Like all the technical bits on it. Okay, good. So we don't need that. That's my error. Because it's not in the policy, it's in the guidelines. Cool. So I'm moving that recommendation. Is there a seconder? Councillor Wilkinson. So with our policies, we went for quite a while without reviewing a lot of our policies, and we've taken that on with rigour this year. Thank you very much for the work in bringing these to us, and also particularly for the work in making it clear what was before, what is being recommended, and why is that being recommended. I think we've got to a good place today in terms of ensuring well, first of all, we've highlighted 5 business days. It's very important to us, and it's also very important to the public that they've got time to digest material and be aware of material prior to council meetings, and that this council, as the public would expect, has decision making over our CEO's key performance objectives. So I think both of those policy amendments are important. I'm grateful to see the water and sewage inundation to private property policy. I think that will be very helpful to people when that's a difficult time. So that's me. Does anyone else wish to speak to it? No? All good. Vote. Shall we vote on that? So all in favour? All in favour. Very good. Thank you very much. Is that our last item? That's our last item. So are there any... Sorry, which one? The 7.1 we did prior, and the 7.2 we closed. So are there any general business items anyone wishes to raise? No? Okay, so at 3:27 I declare this meeting closed. Thank you.